Sustaining an art career your entire life is very much about getting past the different challenges, maintaining drive and focus. I remember back in 1979, my first exhibition in New York City, first one-person exhibition. My work was called Convulsive, Obsessive, and Demonic, and I remember thinking that was actually pretty cool, that I was happy to see that somebody had felt that strongly about what I was doing. And in a way, it really was, in some ways, on the mark, because I was really experimenting and changing my approach on a daily basis to how I made my work. I also remember early on seeing Picasso's Guernica in an encyclopedia my parents had purchased in 1957, and being just mesmerized by it, thinking, what is this? What am I looking at? I was only 3 or 4 years old, and I was used to seeing things that were very clear, and the narrative was straightforward and very safe. But in this case, there were things going on that really puzzled me. That really set up my interest that early on in art, and in what I later understood to be highbrow art, or what one would find in a museum. Later on, my exposure to lowbrow art, like Mad Magazine, Eerie Magazine, things that either were funny or scary, and then later on, in the late 60s, to Zap comics, which were psychedelic underground comic books, really opened up my eyes in both enlightening and dangerous ways to really see the world very, very differently, and more or less frantically at these really bizarre images. It was quite a powerful moment for me. I quit college at 19. I did finish my BFA 20 years later. But I really wanted to get out there. I really needed to find my own way in the art world. And I needed a plan. So the first thing I did was start working at an art supply store in Mount Vernon, New York. And that really took care of two things. One, it gave me an option of getting art supplies at a discounted price. And I also focused on picture framing, archival picture framing, which was a growing field at the time, and it was a relatively new field. And I felt I needed a craft, some way to support my habit, my dirty little habit of being an artist. And then a few years later, in 1978, I opened an art gallery in Tuckahoe, New York. What I did was I got a big square space in a small mini mall, kept about 75% of the space in the front as an art gallery, and in the back I did picture framing, which would support the exhibitions so I wouldn't have to rely on sales. So it gave me an option of having exhibitions that would address one very, very, very big hurdle that I had early on in my career. Living in the suburbs and in the shadow of New York City was not the best position for an artist. The New York City artist elites would have perceived at that time myself as being less serious because I wasn't in New York City. So what I did with my gallery is I had artists from New York City paired with artists from Westchester County, and for 7 years it worked out quite well. Things really started to change for me in the 80s. First, I was married, and that was obviously a big change. The second one was the East Village was really starting to boom, and there was at that time also an economic boom. So that environment, which very fortunately embraced figurative art, and especially the surrealist and the expressionist, or neo-expressionist, which I found out I was later on, was pretty much opposite of what was going on in New York City prior to that, which was this overall stance that painting was dead, and except for a few minimal artists or photorealist artists, painting was looked down upon at that time. So it was nice that the East Village opened up and those options had come my way. Also at that time, there were two landmark exhibitions that added more fuel to the fire of expressive figurative painting. They were Expressionism, a German intuition, and Italian art now, an American perspective. What followed was a sort of invasion from Europe of German neo-expressionist painters and Italian trans-avant-garde artists that had a ripple effect throughout the United States, especially in New York. On a personal level, in 1985, I became quite ill and had to sell my gallery and my business. Shortly after I got back on my feet, I was in a pretty bad car accident, and that knocked me for a loop for about 6 months. When I was feeling better, I started to make tools and stencils, and I started to think of different ways of making art to overcome my physical weaknesses. And this eventually led to an emphasis in drawing and inevitably sculpture. Due to my interest in drawing and the amount of exhibitions I got based on my drawing, I was approached by Raoul's restaurant in Soho to make a drawing of their staff and their clientele. At this particular time, a commission fit perfectly into what I was doing, and some place like Raoul's, which was really a quintessential institution of New York City that was a hideaway, outrageously fun and romantic place that actors, singers, and artists of all kinds would frequent. So I really felt at that time that I was getting a toehold on a part of Manhattan that would not have been open to me in any other circumstance. So I took the commission. It worked out well, and in fact, all these years later, that drawing is still in the restaurant, and they're celebrating, I believe it's their 41st or 42nd year of business. Unfortunately, in a time of COVID, I'm not sure what's going on there now, but hopefully they will survive. Drawing also translated nicely into a mix of sparsely oil paints that I was applying at the time due to my limited ability to stand and sit, and the viscosity of graphite and the oil in the oil paint really worked well, and I was able to stretch the amount of coverage on a canvas that I got in a very limited amount of time, again due to my physical condition, which eventually did get better. When I was feeling better, one day I just decided to start carving, which which in turn brought me back to my roots as the son and grandson of carpenters. I first learned how to use a saw, a hammer, a chisel, a mallet from the ages of 12 to 14, and also following in my grandfather's obsession with recycling raw materials like salvaged wood and nails. I really focused on taking what I found, reshaping it, painting it, and using it in my artwork. So at this point, I would have sculpted forms mounted on top of or adjacent to painted canvases that added a new dimension to my work. This was really important because I've always been very, very focused on craft and really getting into techniques that required tremendous focus and dedication and really were meditative in many ways. So the carving and the repetition of hammering and chiseling really felt like home to me. It wasn't long before I started to make freestanding sculpture, and I really look back upon some of the artists that really influenced me, like Picasso, as I mentioned earlier, with Guernica, Archipenko, and just the Cubist approach to sculpture, which I felt most comfortable with. This was also the time that I had my first New York City representation in a gallery called Portico, New York, who specialized also in art fairs in Chicago and Cologne, Germany. And especially in Cologne, I did really well with the sculptures. I immediately understood that in Europe, it was much, much easier to present, exhibit, and sell sculpture. And I really felt very, very good about that because I really hit a wall with my sculptures in the States, aside from a few sales here and there. So that really helped move along my career and really was a strong driving force in me sticking with sculpture. Again, referencing back to my grandfather's obsession with recycling materials, I started adding more and more found objects in their original state or slightly changed if they were wood. And it added new dimension and even challenges in my work because I had to figure out how to attach glass and ceramic and metal and wood and anything that I found, plastic, in a solid and organized way that kept the aesthetic image that I had desired in those pieces. So I could add, even at times, a motor that I might find an old rotisserie motor that I might find in the garbage that someone was throwing out and still worked, and I would also use that to make kinetic sculptures where I literally had to make the gears to adapt to the motor so that it would fit into the sculpture. Just jumping back a little bit, looking back into the middle 80s, I started teaching as an added income because I had sold the gallery and needed that. So by 1995, a decade later, I was still teaching, still curating. My daughter Laura was born, and I saw that I also needed to start writing, I guess, at that time. So I did, and eventually, a year and a half to 2 years later, I started to write for the New York Times. So it really took off for me. I found numerous magazines that liked my style of writing. It added to my career in some ways, but hurt my career in other ways. And when one decides to do this to be an artist, to be a curator, to be a writer, you really have to be careful to balance it, because everybody wants you to write about them. Some people want you to curate shows for them, but very few people need artists. There's so many, and it's so competitive that you really have to be careful and make sure that when people introduce you and they say, this is Dominick, he's a writer from blah, 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 at some point in the conversation, you need to make it clear that you're an artist and that this writing career and your curatorial career is really just part of your artistic endeavors. It's part of your approach to art. It's part of your message, that you do not separate them, that they are all one, and that you are at your core an artist first. I was always interested in networking, but not doing it in a very forceful or formal way, but just to try to find a way to get people together and just meet up and talk and experience the art world as equally and as normally as possible. So by the late 1990s, I started a group called Art Safari, and what we did is we met at a designated location. In those days, we did it by phone. I called everyone up and said, I'll meet you at such and such a coffee shop on a location somewhere in Soho, and from there we'll walk around and look at art galleries. So I did, and it worked out really well. We had anywhere from 5 to 15 people, artists, writers, curators, gallerists, collectors, all meeting, touring galleries, experiencing the same art, discussing what we looked at, and then whoever could, and most did, we stayed, had dinner, and discussed what we saw, what stood out, what we felt fell short, and how we enjoyed hearing others' opinions, because it did change. Everyone has different life experiences. Everyone has a different background, and it was really fun, and it went on for quite a long time. I believe it was over a dozen years. And I also remember after 9/11 really pushing hard to go back down and really getting back into that part of Manhattan, back into the galleries as soon as it was safe, to help the galleries, to help the businesses, to try to create a sense of normalcy. So it did really fit a tremendous need, both for creating a community and for helping the artists. In 1998, I started the Postapocalyptic Tattoo series, which addressed my deep concerns with the environment, with water and air pollution, transgenic food, and just generally speaking, how off the rails things seem to be going. And I'm sure, looking back, that this was prompted by the birth of my daughter and my concern for her world as she grew older, and the potential of her being hurt by certain things. So I really started to focus on the environment and, as I said, on pollution, and developed a body of work that would show in a very lighthearted way the effects of pollution, the effects of hot metals and a dangerous environment. And I think it didn't really catch on at the beginning, and as time goes by, it seems to be one of my most potent and influential series, because it did raise some alarm bells, and I think people see the work differently now. They're not as appalled by the deformities, but more understanding of my concerns at this point, which is really great. Portico Gallery, which was my representation at the time, closed in 2002. I was still doing all the writing, the teaching, the curating, and of course doing all that to sustain my studio. So I started to look elsewhere outside of Manhattan for representation. I was represented by Lunar Base Gallery in Brooklyn for 2 years, from 2005 to 2007. It also coincided with exposure in Japan, my first exposure. I had an interview and a cover of one of my works on the magazine called the New York Gaho, and that was really great. And later on, that would pay off with exhibitions there. Lisa Boyle Gallery also exhibited my work at the same time, as well as Kashike Art Projects in Chicago. Lunar Base also, as well as Lisa Boyle, did the art fairs in Miami, which was extremely helpful as sales go anyway. I mean, that's really what that's about for the artist. But it also increased my exposure and helped to promote the Postapocalyptic Tattoo series. Also in 2005, I got my art was used on the cover of Blurred Vision, which was a magazine about new narrative art, or new ways of presenting narrative, not so much like a comic book, and perhaps not a graphic novel, but somewhere in between, somewhere where you could straddle both worlds and come up with something a little bit different. Also in 2005 to 2007, I was the curatorial advisor for the Lab Gallery in Manhattan. That was a pretty cool space. It was a half glass and half drywall space on the corner of 47th and Lexington, and it was street level, so it had tremendous exposure 24/7. I curated exhibitions, and I brought in outside curators. Published curatorial essays that I wrote for exhibitions there. And while this was happening, the art world, which was dominated by Soho, and for a brief time the East Village, had moved officially to Chelsea. So I was able to, in those exhibitions, work with as many people as possible from those areas, as well as outside of New York State. The gallery was really fun. It sort of harkens back to my theory about the art safaris and bringing the art world together from all aspects of the art world. We did about 25 shows a year. For each exhibition, we had a dinner party. The space was owned by the Roger Smith Hotel, which had a kitchen that was not in use at the time. So we would cook meals and have an opening dinner where we'd have anywhere from 20 to 30 people sitting, breaking bread, discussing again the art world, meeting the artists, meeting the curators, and just, again, trying to normalize, to make the art world more comfortable, more human. Because especially in Soho, there was a coldness that there was a barrier between the general public and the art world, the controlling art world. And to me, it was important to break that down as much as possible by having people sitting, artists, curators, collectors, gallerists, and just kind of have fun and drink together and eat together and spend time together. One of the biggest things that pushed the central focus from Manhattan to the north was DIA. They took a 160,000 square foot building, which was an old Nabisco packaging factory in Beacon, New York, and opened up a world-class museum. This in turn brought galleries and artists via gallery spaces or studio spaces to Beacon, and it was a pretty exciting time. It never totally took hold. It was not sustainable on the level that we all had hoped, but it did change and open up the art world, certainly through the suburbs to the north of New York City. In 2005, I also left the New York Times, and I landed in a couple of galleries in the Beacon Newburgh area, Van Burnt Gallery and Yellowbird, which again was helped open up my world and brought new faces and new people, and was, again, I keep stressing this, that community, to build a community is really important, especially if you don't have major contacts in the art world. You need to create your own world. You need to create your own community. It's very, very important. And I know, being older, I'm not so good at social media, but I still believe fully in face to face and hanging out and getting to know people in person. And I think that that's very important. In 2006, I got into Local 829, which is a union job as a scenic artist. I am currently, I'm retired from that field, but it helped stabilize an income. It focused on sculpting and painting, which I was good at. I worked with artists, and it was fun. It certainly boosted my options for curating, because I met so many new artists that I would not have met normally, that I was able to work with down the road or while working as a scenic artist when I was creating exhibitions. And it was really, really important to me to have all these different options and avenues that helped, as I said, my curating, and in a way, my art. It showed me a few different types of material that I was not aware of. It also showed me ones that I wanted to stay away from, because things can get very toxic in the movie business and the TV business. So it was definitely a learning experience, and it was well worth it for me economically, and just for stabilizing, again, a part of my life that needed to be stabilized, and so I could maintain my studio. 10 years into the Postapocalyptic Tattoo series, I started traveling a survey of the work, an exhibition that was curated by Carol Kino, and it really worked out well. She narrated the comic book style catalog that we created. It went from the Blue Star Contemporary Arts Center in San Antonio, Texas, to the Housatonic Museum of Art in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Later on, there were smaller versions of the exhibition in Tokyo at Gallery Milieu, and many years later in Prince Gallery in Copenhagen. It was a fun time. It was a major installation. There were hundreds and hundreds of drawings and paintings, and the story was finally told in its entirety, and it was really a great moment for me to have this exhibition. My current New York City representation with Kim Foster Gallery began in 2010. And I think one of the things about the art world is that you never know who you're meeting and what will happen down the road. I first met Kim Foster 15 years before I ended up in her gallery in 1995, and we stayed in contact. We first met when she had a space in, I believe it was on Crosby Street in Soho, and I was always interested in her basic approach. She was very personable. She was very strong-minded, and told you exactly what she felt. And I really admired her for that, and really appreciated that. And we stayed friends all these years. In addition to that, I had started working on these street urchin sculptures, which were basically a skeleton of found material, and on top of that I would put sand and acrylic medium. I'd make a paste and build up the surface to create these little figures. And the reason why I did all this, and the reason why I focused on these forms, was my great concern for the marginalized people and domestic animals that were affected by the downturn in the economy in 2008. And it became an obsession. I ended up making about 50 pieces in that series, and Kim loved the work, and it just worked out for me at that time. One of the other aspects of the street urchins was the violence that was due to the drug wars in Mexico, and I felt very strong about that as well, and was very concerned that not only were people dying in the masses, but it would eventually travel and go throughout the Americas. So the approach that I had, adding some aspects of violence and the partially formed figures, really spoke volumes to me about what was going on in the world at that time. The next big series after the street urchins was Saints, Sinners, and the Collective Unconscious, and it really was about, for me, about human behavior. So I took actual stories of saints. I used album covers for the sinners, and the collective unconscious really represented my general belief that the images that I use and the things that I see in my mind come from this generally formed mass of past, present, and future ideas and concepts and thoughts and images that are just floating around in the universe. And this series was an attempt for me to express that and to lay it out and just show my thinking. What eventually happens, and what eventually one might see and understand, is that the saints and the sinners really create a moral structure for day-to-day life, of how we get through as a citizen of the globe as best as we can, hopefully, from day to day, whereas the collective unconscious is the studio, is the time of total freedom for the artist, so that I could create and think and respond and react and express anything that's on my mind at any given time, and really evaluate myself and my beliefs outside of the saints and the sinners, outside of the everyday, which is extremely important. A pretty large portion of the saints, sinners, and collective unconscious works were displayed at the Hampton Gallery at UMass Amherst in 2017, and that was, again, a major show for me. It really pulled together all aspects of my career: sculpture, painting, collage, found objects. I even made the picture frames myself out of found wood. And the whole thing really came off really well for me and was very well received. And I'm really glad that I have the catalog and had that experience at UMass. I stopped teaching in 2015. A year or two later, I had the show at Prince Gallery in Copenhagen. We were planning to do an exhibition and a tour in Denmark in August, September of this year, but of course with COVID it became impossible, so hopefully we'll get back to that in a year. But I do look forward to that, and again, maintaining that relationship with Eric Prince and working together on exhibitions. I really firmly believe not just in working locally or nationally, but internationally. In 2019, I had a 45-year retrospective high-low that opened at the Clara M. Eagle Gallery at Murray State University in Kentucky. T. Michael Martin did a tremendous job curating this exhibition because he literally went through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of works to pull together a very clear and concise history of about 20 different periods that I have gone through in my life. And the show was to travel, again, with the state of the world now. We don't know what's going to happen, but hopefully it will be traveling and other people could see it and enjoy and look through it and hopefully understand my work. I do hope to continue curating when things return to the new normal, to try to write again and get back into the flow of things. And I continue to this day to work on my current series, the Crest Contamination series, which is about the sticker obsession in inner cities throughout the U.S. So once I get in my studio and begin, this is basically what I'm looking at. I have an easel set up with hundreds of stickers prepped, pre-cut, ready to go, just about everywhere that I could reach. Looking to see what makes the most sense on what I've already drawn, prepped and cut up, made for the application to the paintings. The paintings basically start out as a tinted surface of canvas. I use unprimed canvas. Then I coat the unprimed canvas with 2 layers of acrylic medium. On top of that, I face mount old drawings. The one on the bottom here is from a life drawing class that I was teaching. I did a quick demonstration from the model, and then the top strip is pretty much the center of an old India ink painting I did with various washes. And I just cut a section of it, picking one that I thought extended the body up in a very interesting way, but not really, just sort of suggesting that there's a figure that continues up. The stickers here, in this particular instance, are pretty much done. I have 3, 1, 2, and 3. Those are not permanently attached. The rest are. I'm just going to go through a couple more just to see if these are the right ones, and once I decide that, which hopefully will be later today, I'm done, and then I'll let it dry overnight, and then tomorrow I'll hit it with 2 more coats of clear matte medium, and then when that's thoroughly dry, 2 more coats of special matte medium that adds UV protection. Everything I use is permanent, but I do like to just be really careful about that and just put a little extra protection on the canvases. So those are the stickers that I'm working with. These are the ones that if I feel I need more or different ones from what I've selected, I have a table set up here for a quick viewing, and then on top of that, there's several hundred stickers ready to go in these shelves. There's about 20 shelves here that are loaded with stickers. Here's a piece that I just finished. It's waiting for the final 2 coats of the UV protection. Also in the studio, I have gone through some old sketch pads and drawing folders and just pulled out some things that I may possibly use as background. That's where I got that middle section. It's in here somewhere. Alright, so I thought I finished this, but I did not. I had some issue with the balance of it once I took it out of the studio and placed it in a more neutral space, and I felt that there was too much emphasis on this face, so I put another sticker over it to calm that down a little bit, and to bring it more to the left, to bring the composition more to the left, I added this fellow here and this, whatever that is, there. And I think now it reads better. It has more central focus and it's more balanced.